Hello, I'm Shane Bybee, and for 30 years I've been helping students achieve their college dreams. In that time, I've discovered that success looks different for every student. That's what this podcast is about. What do families need to know to be successful in the college admissions process? Hello, today I'm joined with Ronell Smith. Ronell, among his many facets, his jack of all trades resume, is a city councilman in Southlake. That's not a day job though, Ronell. So what do you do for a day job?
So my day job is I run a brand strategy company. I mainly work with startups, helping them reacquire customers lost to competition or to acquire new customers in very competitive verticals. So that's what I'm normally doing from 4 a.m. to about 2 p.m. I'm an early riser, and I can't work effectively when everybody's up and things are really going.
And then the other claim to fame is you have two fantastic daughters.
Yes. I have three awesome women in my house. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're about to start this crazy college admissions thing, right? Getting ready to, because your oldest daughter is a sophomore in high school, so she's getting ready to. We've met and talked about kind of a plan for next year. What is just gearing up to now? What are the things, I don't know, that you've been most concerned about, or that's been out there? Like what? I guess good starting point. What's your perception of the entire process?
It's starting to get nerve-wracking because, in my mind, you try to come up with the fit, right? Like, for example, I've always known that my oldest daughter, I think, would fit on a private college, smaller, either a liberal arts or, a more focused school. And my oldest daughter, I think, would fit with a public, large public university or a private. So for my oldest, really keying in on what are the schools I think would be a good fit. The issue with that is she hasn't experienced those schools. And last year would have been, normally we visit schools every summer, just kind of, a fun thing, visit the campus, visit the library. And so we lost the whole year of being able to do that in 2020. So I have an idea of the schools she'd be interested in. And then I'm kind of preparing her for being able to qualify for admission. Me and my wife have done, the heavy lifting as far as preparing financially for it. Whether they get scholarships or not, we'll be able to handle that. But what I've always told them since they were in second and fourth grade, because they're 2 years apart, is make it hard on mom and dad. Whatever school you want to go to, be able to get admitted. We'll worry about paying for it. So as it is now, though, it's just, finding the right fit for her. It's a challenge.
And has she gotten any closer to figuring out what she wants to study?
And not really. I mean, over the summer, COVID, she's took an interest in clinical psychology, and she's been reading a lot of books about it, which is, so foreign from what we had thought about before, what I'd ever thought about. Because, she loves acting and theater, but she's always said she doesn't want to do that as a career. She may want to do it as a major, but, in that case, she'd be getting an MBA or a PhD in psychology, something after that professional degree. So that's part of the calculus as well. Is I'm really open as far as what they major in. What I care about is what their career is. I want them to choose a career that they can be successful and be able to drive the car as far as financially living what they want to live, doing the things they want to do.
What's looking at it right now, getting ready to go? What's the biggest concern you have?
Oof, my biggest concern is figuring out the school, figuring out the right city, for example, I follow a bunch of core researchers who are experts in looking at kids. As we've talked before, 50% of kids in the country graduating are A students. So good grades is table stakes. Making sure she has the right extracurriculars. But then from there, saying, okay, what is the right city? What is the right school? But, I have a couple of the buddies I was just talking about, a couple of researchers that I follow. One of the things they talk about is look for schools in your state. Find the best schools in your state. Don't look beyond your state, especially if you live in a big state with tons of great schools. For example, where we are right now is, I was told she should look at SMU. Another place I wanted to look is UT. They have a really good theater program, have a great business school. It's in the state. And again, I don't want to overlook, a really good state school. So while I hadn't thought of, go, you go.
Now, is the factor there? I mean, are they saying to look at your in-state schools because of costs, because of access? What's their reasoning?
Well, and it's a group of, and these are guys who graduated from top schools. Well, if you look at it, me and you have talked about this, Shane. One of the things that parents over-index on is the credentials, right? But it's not the case that a kid who graduates from law school at UT makes any different from a graduate of Yale, which is the top law school in the country, right? It ultimately comes down to the person, and that's the point they make. While parents over-index on the school, the name of the school, the brand they can wear on a shirt, what you want to do is pick the school where your kid can be inside the top 10%. And that jibes with what Malcolm Gladwell talks about in David and Goliath. A lot of times kids get overmatched. They go to a school where they should have gone to a top public school, a public Ivy like the University of Michigan or University of Virginia or University of Texas. They end up going to an MIT because they're admitted. And they're in the top 20%, whereas they were in the top 3% in their high school, and they feel like a failure. And so for RA, what I tell her is, I want you to be able to go somewhere where you can be in the top 5%. You're going to get to know your professors. You're going to have your pick of the internships during the summer. And when it comes time for you to graduate from college, you're going to have, numerous opportunities to make a great salary, to slide into a great career. That's the difference between going to an IBM or an AT&T or a Google as just a regular employee when you can be put on a high program, a high potential program. That's what I want. So she's somewhere in a great spot. So that's what I'm thinking about more than anything.
Yeah. That's it's funny you talk about that, because a couple episodes ago I talked with a student who is he's a PhD candidate at MIT, and his dream schools, he only applied to like 4 schools in high school, graduated like top 5% of his class, awesome SATs, everything was great, and he ended up doing honors computer science at UT. And UT and MIT were his dream schools. He did not get it. He got denied at MIT for his undergrad. And so but then he went to the PhD. He even talks about being in that top, you talk about that feeling like, you're used to being in the top 3% in high school, and now you're in the top 20%. He talks about getting his first math quiz back, math test back, and he made a 30. He says this in the podcast. He made a 30, and it wasn't one of those deals where he made a 30, but the class average was a 25. He made a 30, and the class average was like a 60. So here he is thinking he's this rock star, and he walks in and takes his first test, and he's had nothing but tremendous success through life, and all of a sudden he's like, oh my gosh, and he had the resilience to recover from it. But yeah, it's definite. That's my challenge to students. I always say top third. Go someplace where you can be in the top third. That's going to give you leadership, research, internship opportunities that you wouldn't get otherwise.
I mean, think about it. And I get it, but I never drank this Kool-Aid, because what I tell my kids is I want them to be successful, right? For example, and you sent me an article about this. We're the valedictorians today, right? Most of them are not running Fortune 500 companies. What I want is my kids to have the stick-to-itiveness, the drive, the industriousness to say, okay, I'm going to work as hard as I can in school and let the chips fall where they may. I'm going to get better and better. But what I want them to do, I don't want them to make an A in school and an F in life. So that's where I come down. It's what kind of drive and determination can I see? Can I nudge forward? Can I support? Such that when you're in college, you're going to do the same things you've done as far as working hard. But let's face it, college and high school too, to a large extent, is about the relationships formed. So if they go to the University of Nebraska, University of Texas, wherever, I want them to be, one of the hardest working. I want the professors to know them. I want people to be able to write excellent letters of recommendation, such that they have good footing when they graduate college and go to professional school. To me, it's about success in life. I always tell people the wealthiest person in Southlake did not graduate from an Ivy League school. That person, or at least the wealthiest cohort, graduated from A&M or Texas Tech, or it's.
Hmm.
I just don't get caught up in that. I mean, it's great. I wouldn't knock it. My oldest daughter, my youngest daughter's always wanted to go to Stanford. I could certainly see her going. She's really strong in math and science. She's also an athlete, which schools like MIT give priority to. But I'm like, hey, listen, I want you to be successful in life. That's really what I care about.
Yeah. It's funny you said that. So a couple of questions that made me think of there. One is, okay, when everything went sideways back in March, spring of 2020, right? You and I talked at the time, and you had a really good observation just at that time that was, your daughter not only lost out of like 9 weeks of really good instruction because there was in March of last year there was a race to the bottom by teenagers, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's the absolute least I have to do? Um, and so they lost out on that semester. That and then has your older daughter been doing online or in person this year?
She's been doing online all year. So my youngest did online until December, until January, and she went back. My oldest
Okay.
really has thrived in this setting. I mean, if I'm honest, my oldest would have been a great candidate for homeschool. Although I don't think that works for her personality. I mean, she can be so introverted. She can just kind of, while she's not shy, she just loves her, times with herself, so to speak.
Hmm.
Fortunately, last year, when they ended the grades at the end of the third period, all my daughter's grades were about where she would have wanted them to be. So she finished strong, and she did really well in the 9 weeks where there was no more class. But then she slid in the summer, and I just saw a level of resilience, grit, and determination from my kids that just hadn't been there. I mean, they've always been great kids, but I just saw them being so industrious, so being so forward thinking, and they just took a giant leap in maturity, both of them. So I was fine
Wow.
this year with my daughter, my oldest, being out of school because her performance hasn't lagged, and she's taken a couple of challenging courses in geometry and calculus. I'm not calculus and chemistry. And then my oldest daughter, my youngest daughter, is doing really well in class as well, all hundreds in math and science. My two main areas that I focus on anyway. But what we said to them and what holds true is great grades is table stakes. You got to have that, right?
Hmm.
But what are
Hmm.
the other
Yep.
things? The biggest things you get from school is relationships, whether with your teachers or with your classmates. That shouldn't change. Check in on your teachers, send them emails, send them notes, and they did that. Text your friends, email your friends, call your friends, and they did that. So to me, the level of maturity that I saw from my daughters last year was not only astounding and eye-opening. I think it makes me feel good about them. Certainly, my oldest being 2 years away from going to college. So I've been really happy with the progress they made.
You've mentioned something a couple of times. I listened to a podcast this week. I really liked it. The speaker on the podcast, he made the comment that you go to college for one of three things, and you have to kind of decide where these three things lie, are the importance of each of these three things for you. And the first is an education. You're going to learn stuff you don't already know.
Mm-hmm.
And how important is that? The second is kinship, building those relationships with professors and classmates. And so how important is that to you? And then the third is credential. And I really like that kind of classification of it. Credential in that, you have to, are you working for a teaching certificate or you want to be a nurse? Like, what is it that credential is like? Of those three things, as you're starting to pick out the schools, you got to figure out what's going to be the most important. So for like your oldest, who, because when we met, I think last month we met, and I made the comment to her, my comment that I made to a lot of kids. I said, she said she likes to write, and I said, well, what's your blog, and let me see what you've written. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah. And you said she's been doing some film stuff now because she's got a huge passion for that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
So it's figuring those things out. Like what? So on that list of credential, I think I know credential, education, kinship. Where do you think, for your oldest at least, those are going to rate in your
It
selection
it would
process?
go in that order.
Okay.
So she loves learning. I mean, really, really loves learning. And one of my biggest frustrations has been um, we, I discovered in high school, and I had this talk with her 2 days ago. I discovered a love of biology when I had a strong biology teacher who saw something in me. So it wasn't just that I was interested in it. He saw something in me and he pushed me forward. I discovered my love of English in ninth grade when I had a teacher who taught me about, you know, participle phrases and gerunds and all this stuff. And then literature. I just knew that would always mean something to me. And so science and writing have always been two, hallmarks in whatever I've done achievement wise. The other thing that where she's similar is I love learning for the sake of learning. I also love finding people. I like being around people who share the same values. The credential is a byproduct of that. So for me, for her, I think she's going to go to college and be one of those kids that's just absolutely loves it. Right? She's going to be so fired up to go to class. She's going to really, really enjoy engaging with her professors and the study groups and all that. And I think, the natural byproduct will be, graduating in the top of her class, cum laude, summa cum laude. I really see that for her because I think she'll be a lot like me. She'll enjoy college a lot more because what she loves is and craves is autonomy. She'll love being able to choose the classes. She'll love being able to have the free time to study and to hang out with friends and to work on meaningful projects, to volunteer and do the things that are part of that. So that's part of my calculus in helping her forward because, with each kid's different. And so what I want to do is to say, how do I set this kid up to be successful? And that's where I am now. And that's part of the process of, thinking about the colleges that are a good fit. For example, a friend of mine is going to take her to visit SMU in a couple of weeks. I told her we go to Austin every summer. And it's actually one of the few Texas schools that she's been to anyway, that she's like, okay, I love living in Austin. She likes Austin. She likes cities. So I wanted to just get a feel for the campus.
So when you're in Austin, two other schools to check out. One would be Southwestern University, which is right on I-35, like as you're going into Austin or leaving Austin. Probably a little easier as you're leaving because it's on the right-hand side. But it's in Georgetown, just north of Round Rock. But Southwestern, it's a small liberal arts college there. Really good school. Liberal arts college, which I think fits her pretty well. And then the other, maybe St. Ed's there in Austin as well. Might have some programs that she'd be interested in as well. So a couple other schools, just to get a taste of the variety.
What was the
of
first
schools
one?
you can see? Southwestern University.
Okay.
Really good school. So
I thought you were going to say Austin College. That's the only other college I knew in Austin.
well, Austin College is in Sherman.
Oh.
It's north of here.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
Austin College is north of here. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now there's Austin Community College.
Oh.
It's down there, and you can do that. So yeah. So.
Oh, I didn't know.
No, there's a couple more. Yeah, there's some good ones down there, but those would be the two. Definitely to just get a variety, just a wide range of the possible programs that are out there. I've never actually been to St. Ed's, although they have some great programs. Southwestern's a really nice little campus. All right, you made a comment earlier on about the competitive nature of education. Like you're in a school, you're in a school district. I got this every year. We have seen the cutoff for the top 10% and the top 6% just get higher and higher and higher. And so this week I was talking with a student who is the 7th percentile, and I believe she had a 102 GPA at the 7th percentile. So not in the top 6%, a 102 GPA. So it was something we talked about. Most kids have that. And the thing I stress all the time is, look, don't worry about that. You don't control that. Don't try to scheme it. What are the things that you see your daughters doing that are, well, one, I guess, how concerned about that are you overall? And then what are the things you're doing, you're telling them as they look around and they say they think everybody's got this incredible GPA?
To run their own race. Pastor Craig Groeschel, I heard him at the Gateway Men's Summit a couple of years ago, and he talked about you can't run your race when you're looking over at other people in their lane. The point I've made to my daughters for as far back as I can remember, certainly since they started school, is what I expect from you is your best. And when I see your best, then that's what we're going to set the bar, right? So I know they're A students. I don't care if that's a 99 or a 103, because I don't buy into the logic And I don't know how you feel about this. I don't buy into the logic that a kid who's in the top 10% is going to be any more successful long term than a kid who makes the 89, right? What I ultimately want is that kid to be successful outside of school. And let's face it, all of our goals are different, right? There's 5 things I tell my daughters I expect from them: happy, healthy, successful, godly, wealthy. The other stuff I don't care about. I don't care that what I care about is that in their job or in their career they're recognized as one of the best. And when people talk about that, I read this. I spend my mornings on Quora sites listening to these educators, and these are professors at MIT and UC Berkeley and UC Davis, all these schools, and they talk about when you graduate college, nobody's going to ask you what your GPA is, right? They may ask to go into your to get a professional degree. What I want them to be able to do is talk about their experiences, talk about how hard they're willing. I want the people to see how hard they're willing to work, whether as a student or as an employee or as a researcher. So, I met kids. Our former nanny, she graduated with a 100, and she was a 99 average, and she wasn't anywhere near the top 10, right? She had a brother who had a 97 average. He has an engineering degree now from UT, and he wasn't even anywhere near. He was outside the top 15. So I think it's great. What I want, though, I want you to be an A student. I want you to be able to score well enough on your ACT or SAT to get into the school of your choice. And then from there, I want you to work your ass off. That's all I care about. I don't get bogged down. And listen, it's great if you're a GT or whatever kid. But in your life as a parent, your goal is to do what you can with whatever it is you have. And what I saw in my kids, that a level of drive and determination that me and their mom had, that I know is going to serve them well to be successful. Because let's face it, my goal for them is to be incredibly successful, but not just in school. So I wouldn't be happy if they graduated in the top 7% and they went into a career, they chose a field that I thought they could have done better than. And I'm not knocking a career. What I mean is, if they settled on something and they didn't push themselves. For example, if my daughter said she wanted to be a teacher, I'd have no problem with that. But I also want them to write books. I want them to be one of the best teachers. Because I'm a believer in, if you can get somebody who's willing to work hard enough to be in the top 1%, I don't care if you're making paper clips, you're going to be wealthy. You're going to be successful. So that's what I care about. And that's not going to be determined in high school or in college.
And what we see a lot of times, especially when kids are hyper focused on grades, and that's the thing I stress to my 2 boys, is do the best you can. If you come home and you've got an 80 on an assignment, now he's in 2nd grade. If he has an 80 on an assignment, there's something else. We got to talk about that. But most of the time it's because he didn't read the directions, and the directions said circle 2 things, and he just circled 1 thing. So we talk, I want you to, that's not your best, bud. But when you get into the upper grades, when the focus is on, are you making the highest, are you getting maximum score value for this class? Are you getting maximum score value for the class? Kids stop focusing on learning the material along the way. Had one of our coaches there at our does our SAT prep. He told me a story about one of his students this year who's been online, who he has caught 3 times cheating, and all 3 times it's the same cheating mistake. It's the same thing the kid's doing, cheating. So what he's doing, the English teachers are all doing the same work, but they're using different source material to do it from. And he's borrowing from other people in other classes, and writing reports about poems or short stories that they're reading in other classes. So it's really easy. It's like a new level of lazy, right? The first time you did it and you get your 0, you're kind of like, I need to do something different there. He's done it 3 times. That's one of my concerns. That's why I asked the question earlier about how's it been for them this year if they've been online, because I think we're going to have a lot of kids next year. We already talk about, we get this label sometimes from parents where they say, oh, he's a great student, just a bad tester. And my thing, I say, if I get on the scale's going to tell me I'm 30 pounds overweight. That's not the scale's fault, right? That's that brownie that I ate at 9 o'clock's fault. No, it's not even that fault, right? But I mean, it's not the scale's fault that I'm overweight. And that's what the SAT and ACT do for us. All of the other debates aside of, is it Is it the test biased? Does the test is it connected to affluence? All of that stuff. Fine. Everything is connected to affluence,
Mm-hmm.
right? Getting Tom Brady, the reason he got to where he is has a lot to do with being able to afford a whole lot of special position
Yep.
coaches.
Yep.
Like everything's related to affluence. So let's forget about that stuff. But the other part of it is, I think we're going to have a situation this next year where we see a lot of kids who this last year have been focused on got to get the grades, and we know a lot of kids went online because, I mean, look at the school district's response to it. Everything's going to be pass fail. We're going to get rid of final exams. No more multiple choice exams. Everything's going to be open book. So there's just been that lowering, and I don't know that the education's responded to that necessarily to increase the rigor that's going to go along with the learning. I think instead we saw one of our favorite teachers. I don't know if you saw our post a couple of days ago, but apparently one of her students sold his essay to 3 or 4 other students,
Wow.
and that's gone on like crazy. I've talked to several students who have made a part-time job during this last year has been taking tests for their friends.
Yeah.
And we can, yeah, it's been something else. So, it's the, I'm concerned about what's going to happen next fall whenever I have this group of kids they're making better grades than they've ever made. And yet they knowing how to apply the Pythagorean theorem to a particular SAT problem is going to elude them for a little bit. We'll catch up, but
So it's funny you say that. So my youngest daughter was doing really well in school when she was out, right? And she was, like I said, she was being so much more mature, but her grades went up when she went back. And I think that had a lot to do with the satisfaction of being around her classmates. She felt like she was more involved because she's always enjoyed education, but for her, the social is important, right? With seeing her friends in the hall, it's kind of like you eating your broccoli knowing you're going to have a brownie, right? You eat that broccoli heartily, right? My oldest daughter, which is interesting. So my oldest daughter has always had a very very strong sense of integrity. She's the kid that we had to tell that if your teacher says you can use your calculator on this test, use your calculator. Don't think that you're
mm-hmm.
cheating, right? I have no, but that's the whole thing. We're not chasing some magical mythical place, right?
Mm-hmm.
If she was trying to be a top 10% or have this magical grade point average, maybe she would. But I know there's been times where I'll caught her at the table and it's supposed to be an open book assignment. And she's like, I should know this without opening the book. And I'm like, baby, if the teacher says, and my wife will say, well, we don't want you doing anything that the teacher says not to do, but if she says you can do it. So I worry less about that because I'm very sensitive to, I don't want them to return to school next year and be behind. And
Mm-hmm.
I know my daughter doesn't want that either. So I just think, we have a saying in this house that keep the main thing, keep the goal. And the goal for me, ever since I was 12 years old, when I thought about it, I wanted $2, was I did not, this is when I coined the saying. And again, I was probably in 6th grade myself, or 5th grade. I don't want kids who make an A in school but F in life. And I just have never over prioritized things that I don't think have a great deal of value. For example, it is great if you can be an A student, top 10% in, and then top 10% in college. But that's typically not what happens. The people that you're seeing who are running companies, who are the most successful in their professions, didn't check all those boxes all the way through. Some did. Some certainly did. But if you look at, for example, if I want my daughter to be able to be C-level at a Fortune 100 company, she doesn't need to go to MIT, Dartmouth, Caltech. She needs to be incredibly disciplined, incredibly focused, get an MBA, and form the relationships. And that's the thing that's often lost. And me and you talked about this with the whole grade inflation across the country. Students are their primary job is just getting A's. And they don't develop outside of that, right? And thus you
Mm-hmm.
see the articles written about the best performing kids long term are typically not A students. They're that B student who gets to college is like, oh my gosh, I've always had to work really, really hard, just to make decent grades. And I'm here a University of Florida, a University of Georgia, University of Alabama, University of Arkansas, and I'm like in the top 8% of my class, right? That's what I want, because think about that. That person all of a sudden enjoys school, right? Some of
Mhm.
them become the apple of their professor's eyes. They get the choice internships, and that's to me is setting our kids up to be successful. And that's I can tell you that's where me and my wife are focused is make sure they're the best students, but also the best people. Because one of the things I preach, and I say this all the time to my friends, is we want our kids to go to, a really great school and have all those great credentials. What about prioritizing their mental health? I've known I've had several friends whose kids went off to college and had a mental breakdown. Some
Mhm.
right here in South Lake.
I've had some clients that have done it. Well, and you make the comment about, I was talking about Ario earlier. They're going to experience imposter syndrome at some point.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. And I'll quiz kids that come into the office, like, what do you think the average SAT score is in Southlake? And I'll have a kid that'll say that they'll be sending with a 1250 SAT, and they're like, my SAT's not very good. I'm like, what do you think the average SAT score is in Southlake? 1350, 1400. I'm like, no, it's about 1260 to 1280 every year, which is still, and to put that in context, the national average SAT score is about a 1068.
Mm.
Latest data we have. So the average SAT score in their school district is 2 orders of magnitude. But they have this impression that they're just not a very good student when their SAT score has every indication that they are a good student. They're in the upper part of students around. And they don't get that way too often, that if you have that, that 1260, that 1280, that's a good score.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to ask you about that, because I think when counselors talk, when people like me talk, we tend to talk about the Harvards and the MITs and the Stanfords, because those are the bellwethers, right? Those are the templates, the exemplars. But then I worry that people get the impression that those are the only schools you should aspire to.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like Steph and I, in our parent university program that we've put together, that was some of the feedback that I got back meeting with parents individually was, you talk about Harvard and Stanford, but my kid's headed to tech, and I believe that tech is right there with it. I have to, right? I'm contractually obligated to believe that tech is right there with Harvard. But the reality is, finding really what it is for a kid is figuring out that place that's right for you, that offers. We were talking earlier on about Gabby's podcast, and the story with Gabby was, she's all through her prep, and we're doing everything. She's like, I got to get out of South Lake. I got to get out of the bubble. And then she calls me up and says, hey, I'm going to go to SMU. I'm like, that's kind of a thicker bubble,
Yeah.
Gabby. What happened? But she's like, but she found her tribe while she was there. She found the people she connected with and did the things she wanted. And that's you're going to have imposter syndrome. I have it. I'm, as successful and experienced as you are with brand management, I have to think there are times probably
Every
things
day.
go sideways,
Yep.
and you're like, oh crap, what did I just do?
Yep.
And having the mental resilience to deal with that. So you talked about mental health a little bit. Are you seeing, because you've got these kids that are engaged, and Maddie, podcast that dropped last week, talked about her own mental health, like this last year in college, doing all online classes. Are you seeing anything as far as mental health for your kids or for your kids' friends?
Yeah. So I saw it earliest in my youngest daughter, and it was one of the reasons we wanted her to go back to school. It wasn't anything dramatic. I could just tell something was a little off, right? She's just naturally this normally bubbly, outgoing kid, and she was just a little quieter. And she told my wife that she really wanted to go back to school because she was missing her friends, and it was really cool because this was during the COVID shutdown. My wife has the tracking app on her phone, and every day my daughter would say she's going to go ride her bike, and she noticed she'd be riding in a circle. And what my wife found out was she was going up to the front of the neighborhood, and her and a group of her friends were riding around this roundabout. And so they were still honoring us by not, by being protective with COVID-19, not getting too close, but they just wanted to see and hang out with one another. Then we started letting them run with one another. So that's when I first saw it. And I was like, these kids need an outlet. And I've always preached the importance of mental health. My oldest daughter took a huge leap this summer, And while she wasn't struggling with mental health issues, she realized that many of her friends either were or were likely to be. So she's developed this drive to want to mentor and be an advocate for mental health. And I just think it's the most beautiful thing as a matter of fact. And I got to give you credit for this, Shane. You mentioned, the three things my daughter needed to be doing and preparing for the SAT, ACT, creating a blog and creating videos if that's what she thinks she'd like to do. And she stepped up to the plate and done all three. She's started a blog. She's writing every day. Over the summer, she wrote a short film, and just recently she directed a short film. So it should be out soon. So I just love it. And it's about mental health. So it's just tying all those things together, right? The education and being forward thinking about your career and then putting in the work to be a benefit to not only yourself, but to others. I think it's a beautiful thing. So, she came to me about a month ago and says, Dad, it turns out she had found a book on my shelf. It's called On Death and Dying. And it's one of the foremost pieces of work, The 5 Stages of Death. And she read it. And she had read another book about FBI profiles of serial killers. And she said, I'm really interested in mental health and, what does a clinical psychologist do? What does that look like? And so we're starting to have those conversations organically. And I think that's so great, because what I tell her is whatever it is you end up being, you'll look back and say, I knew that was inside me all along. So don't ignore it. So if you have something you're interested in, then don't be afraid to run towards it. Because, I'm one of those people who I don't believe in follow your passion. And one of my favorite writers, who's the NYU professor, he says, the people who tell you to follow your passion are already wealthy. And he says, people forget that the majority of billionaires made their money in, iron ore smelting or some unglamorous industry, right? And he makes a really good point that if you want to be an actor, or you want to be in theater, then that's great, but you're probably not going to become wealthy doing it. Most people become wealthy doing something very boring, like finance, accounting, right? Medicine, real estate.
Yeah.
So what I preach to my daughters is whatever it is, I don't care what you're passionate about. Yeah, do that. I care what you're willing to work hard enough to become good at, and then the passion will come, right? So I tell her all the time, there's a lot of guys in South Lake, for example, who love golf more than they love their job, but they can't make a living doing playing golf, right? They're not Tiger Woods, right? So you can enjoy your passion on the side. But what is that thing that you're willing to work so hard at that you can see in yourself becoming one of the best at? And I said, that's the sweet spot.
It's that passion versus purpose debate, right?
Yeah.
If you're really good at something,
Yeah.
even though it's not the thing you super love doing, and then a few of us get lucky and our passion, our purpose and our passion align with each other. And I love what you said that I was going to ask you about this. We talked again about credential, education, or kinship. And for some people, and I think this is, I did a College Insight episode a couple of weeks ago about you have to make that decision, because if college is going to be, if you're a first generation student and college is going to be your way to step into a different place socioeconomically, you have to be very cognizant of how you finance that, right? And that the credential may be it. If you're a first generation student, I was first generation. Getting a degree in teaching and education gave me a really secure footing where I knew I had a paycheck coming in every month. I knew how much that paycheck was going to be. And then I knew I had the summers to make extra money if I needed to, and had opportunities like that. So getting to that level, I think sometimes we get this idea that we need to help people go from, first generation college student to CEO.
Yeah.
And that's not really the path. There's a couple of generational steps between there that can take place. And you and I mean, I know a little bit about your background. You talk about being, is it Mississippi?
Yep.
A farm boy from Mississippi. Were you first generation?
Yes.
College?
Yes.
Yeah.
My parents had a high school education. My brother and sister were the first to go to college. And so for me, I had what were at the time very unrealistic expectations. I wanted to live in a South Lake. But that basically just meant that I was going to be willing to work hard enough to end up in a South Lake, right? I wasn't going to graduate from a top college because I wasn't that great of a student coming from a very podunk community of 300 people in Mississippi. Um, so, for me, it was, I wanted, and this is how me and my wife have always viewed it. I want to create the best launch pad I can for my daughters, right? You can't send a 777 into the air with a 300 feet landing strip, right? And
Yeah.
so for us, we're going to create that landing strip, that airstrip for them to be able to propel. Now they have to take advantage of it, right? We
Mhm.
can't do it for them. But our goal has always been to go as far, as fast as we could, such that when it came time for us to send our kids off to college, they couldn't look back and, if I'm honest, and this is a conversation I have with a lot of our friends, is we intentionally want to set the bar high. And I know there's people who disagree with that. Like one of my close friends said, Ronell, if you're in the top 1%, isn't it unrealistic that you'd expect your daughters to be in the top 1/2%? I was like, well, maybe unrealistic. But what I'm really saying is, I don't expect you to have any less than you grew up with. And that's not just financial. We talk about, I want them to be very active and engaged spouses. I want them to be engaged in their kids' life, not just all working and making money and paying for material things. I want them to prioritize, spending time with their family. And so to us, it's just about being the best example. Because one of the things me and Rachel realize is being first generation college students is we're setting the standard for successive generations, but we're standing on the shoulders of our parents and grandparents. I say all the time that if my dad, who was born in the 1930s, had had the opportunities that I had, or Rachel's dad had had the opportunities we had, hell, they'd probably be more successful than we are. So I'm always willing to hold myself accountable and say, more is expected, more is expected, more is expected. So that's what I tell my daughters all the time. And again, it's not just about academics. It's about who they are as people. It's about how they treat people, and about expecting more from themselves and for them to be better all the times and in every situation. Because I mean, let's be honest. I want them to be, and I say this all the time. It's not enough for you to be a good person. I want you to be good to people. I don't want my kids to end up in a South Lake and they're a jerk. I don't want my kids to end up in a South Lake and they're working all the time and not spending time with their kids because they didn't see that. Me or my wife have always worked from home. My wife had a very successful corporate career, and she worked from home for 7 years when we were in Florida. I've owned my own company since 2010, since my first daughter started school. So I just feel very, very, I feel like if you make it a priority, you don't have to worry about it becoming a priority. You don't have to worry about something else replacing it.
And so I'm going to segue a little bit, kind of a dramatic segue, but it goes back to how you and I met originally. And, how, and I remember the first time I ever saw Ronell Smith, you were speaking to the South Lake School Board, the
Oh,
Carroll ISD School Board. And I messaged you from that because your message was so moving when you spoke to them. And there's going to be people listening to this podcast, given some of the headlines that have gone with South Lake in the last year, related to, and it all goes it doesn't all go back to that original video, but it does go back to the CCAP and the DDC and all the other stuff that's gone on. You are, I don't know of a bigger South Lake fan than Ronell Smith. I mean, you wear green, I think, everywhere you go.
yeah.
I mean, you're wearing your Dragon Pride hat. So, what's this last year been like for you? I mean, when it comes to South Lake and in the area, what's your overall perspective?
So I'm a
Because people are
weirdo.
going to want to know.
I'm a weirdo. I think this has been a time of enormous growth in South Lake. I think the things that are happening probably needed to happen sooner. So I want to go back. So if you go back to 2018, for the 4 years previously we had lived here, we didn't know anybody. I mean, we may have known in total 20 people. When I stood up before that school board, that wasn't because of information I had. It was me reacting to people standing up there saying, Carol, we can do better. That this reflection of us isn't fair to the people who know and love South Lake and know a different side of it. I got off that, yeah, I left that podium and I had 40 messages. I immediately started, before I could even go home, people wanted to meet me for coffee. I was at the movies later that night. People were texting me. I was on the news. I didn't realize there was even cameras. I was just out of it, right? But that kind of propelled me to the stage that I'm on, one that I didn't want, but it made me in kind of a known figure people know that I, would step up and speak for the community, and it came from a place of love. Me and my wife and daughters are only here because we love it, and the reason why we love it isn't just the schools. I always tell people that I'm the weirdo that didn't move here just for the schools. Schools is a huge benefit, but the way I couch that is, I wouldn't live anywhere just because it was a great community, just because it had great schools if it wasn't a great community. And that's my background, right? I grew up in a great household, but in a crappy racist community. So just because somewhere had a great school wasn't going to be enough to entice us, right? So we wanted great schools, a great community for our kids, meaning the friends, and then we wanted to be around people that me and Rachel would enjoy calling friends. And so Southlake is all of that. If you look at what's happening with the DDC and CCAP, I think it's really uniting the community more than it's dividing. Here's what I mean by that. Most people are against the plan, the process of creating the plan, and the process of delivering the plan. So to me, I don't understand how people are selling the narrative that we're divided. What people are divided on is maybe the ways in which we address the issues of bullying in this community. But those are things we can easily come together on. The problem with judging us against what I think is an unfair standard, meaning people being for or against the plan, is this was never supposed to be a plan that was delivered to the community in the way that it was delivered. So what I say is, judge us against what I think is a more fair standard. Are we willing to step up and address the issues of bullying in this community? Yes, we are. And I think what you're witnessing is the community refusing to allow Carroll ISD to do what they've done in the past, which is sweep things under the rug and not address things effectively. So what I think you're witnessing is something that I predicted 2 years ago, and I've never said this on camera, but I shared this when I ran for office, that I thought there was going to be I didn't say day of reckoning, but there was going to be something that coalesces this community and that brought us together, where we would take back control of our schools. And what I meant by that was there was too many decisions that were taken out of the hands of parents, and there was not enough justification given for it. And, whether it was special programs, whether it was where funding went for or against special programs, or this just generic decisions that were being made. I felt like in a school district where home prices are what they are, you expect more of a private school experience, meaning the administrators work with and for their constituents. The way things have been done in the past is you felt like nobody was answering to the community, and that's not how it should go. So I really feel good about it. Whether it's the SORT kids or the Southlake families, we can all agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, we all want the same things. And I think that's removing the obstacles, and that's been CISD lacking accountability, lacking transparency, and to a large extent, lacking the strong leadership that a community like Southlake needs.
Do you think is it just the desire to have things go away and have a status quo? Like, what do you think causes that? I mean, it seems like kind of some obvious answers to it, but I'm curious to get your perspective.
You mean parse that for me?
Trying to make things just go away. Like, I could see where we're going to satisfy this parent's upset about this. We're going to satisfy this situation by making it resolve as quickly as possible. Like, what's the resolution?
So one of the things I did in 2019, again, once I got off the dais and I started getting a lot of feedback, then I launched, a campaign less than 3 months later. And, I interviewed administrators, principals, assistant principals, former principals, teachers. And what you find was a culture where things were covered up instead of dealt with, right? Like, say, for example, a parent would complain, the principal would investigate it, the parent was advised they could take it upstream to the administration, but because of past dealings with the administration, they didn't feel comfortable doing that. They didn't feel comfortable anything was done. So there was no punishment for the aggressor or the perpetrator. So that kid who, say, was a bully, whether it was because of calling people fat or calling people unattractive or ethnicity, religion, gender, race, whatever, that continued until somebody 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years later complain. And if you look at what many of the SOAR kids are saying, and I'll be honest, I know a lot of people feel like the SOAR kids aren't telling the truth. I don't believe that. I don't believe 300 kids are lying. And what I say to that is, if one of those kids is telling the truth, it's one too many. And what I think as parents we need to do is find out what were the impediments to this having not been successfully managed in years past. And if those impediments are people, they should no longer be employed by the school district. If it's processes, those processes need to be revamped. But what I'm not going to stand by and allow people to condemn this community as being a bunch of racist people for fighting against ill-conceived, ill-delivered plan. That's not the case. The people aren't the problem in South Lake.
I remember Maddie and I talked about this whenever we talked, because she's been pretty heavily involved in SARC, and one of my comments about some of the SARC comments was that I felt like some of them were, the one example that stood out in my mind was a young lady who complained she was going on a middle school campus, I think, to pick up her younger sibling, and one of the boys who was standing in line started using a manufactured accent, and she felt like she was being derided for that, and she was. I mean, all of that's accurate. The thing is, and this goes back to the video that prompted a lot of this back in 2018, which was, it's a couple of 15-year-old kids doing something stupid and not understanding the boundary between that. And where do we find the balance between, okay, well, you better understand that was stupid. Maddie makes the comment, I think, that, you have to understand that early on, that you can't walk into a workplace. And I think people, by the time they're 22 and walking into a workplace, have figured that out. But when you're 15, one of the comments that I've seen, apparently there was another event where there was a DJ playing some music, and the chant got started. Things like that, where, showing kids that, hey, but then where do you draw the line between showing that? You remember the story came out this last year of a girl who had been accepted to a college, and some young man had held on to a video she had sent when she was 15. So it was 3 years ago, and he held on to it. And then he had this righteous indignation of, ha, gotcha. She's not at 18 the person she was at 15. And so how do we balance that out? She probably feels terrible for that. So when I'm reading through the SARC comments, I kept waiting for, well, there was this one time my English teacher did this, because I know, like, in class and just the process of class, I'm 100% certain I probably said something that some kid found offensive. 100%. I not a racial epithet, I'm sure, but something along those lines. I mean, I was telling somebody yesterday that I had Reed Ballou's daughter in class for a while. Reed was the president of the school board, and I taught his daughter for 2 years. And one time we're talking about To Kill a Mockingbird, and the kids didn't understand how Bob Ewell was so negative on Tom Robinson. And I was like, look, because he's poor too. Like, he doesn't have anything more than Tom Robinson does. And I go, I understand. But in the hierarchy of things, sometimes our psychological justifications just don't make sense. And so even though he's white and poor, he feels superior to someone who's black and poor. Mm-hmm. And I gave the example of, it's like when you watch these shows about addiction, right? Intervention or something, and the person's on heroin and they're like, I really love my kids. I'd do anything for my kids. But then the next slot is like, I really love heroin. I really can't get off heroin. You're like, I love my kids, but I love heroin more. And Christy Ballou quotes me on her Facebook page as saying, I love my kids, but I love heroin more. Ooh. I'm like, Christy, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, context matters, right?
Of course, the conversation. So
you make
and people would be like, yeah, go ahead.
You make a great point. So let's be mindful. 15-year-olds are going to do dumb stuff. Even if it's not uncovered, even if nobody ever knows, even if it's not bullying some kid. But what we have to do is to say, we realize some of those 15-year-olds or 16-year-olds or even 17-year-olds are going to do really nasty things, have the potential to do really nasty things, right, to other kids. And we have to guard against that as best we can. On the one hand, you have measures in place to educate them. Here's our expectations. Here's how dragons treat dragons, as I call it. and then we make them aware of consequences, right? Those aren't simultaneously things. So, you don't educate them. You don't tell them the punishment without first trying to quote unquote modify that behavior as much as possible, right? Which is a point I've made for years. I don't care what your beliefs are. I care how you behave. I care how you treat people, right? People like to get all up in arms, and people heard this at home, and parents this. And no. I don't care what their parents are teaching them. I care that when you come into school, as you mentioned, same as you come into a workplace, whatever your thoughts or beliefs are, you're working together. And let's face it, a kid in Carroll, whether you're a C plus student or 110 average, right? You're working, you're busting your butt off. You're in a competitive environment, no matter how hard you're working. And there's enough stress on all of these kids. So let's do what we can to lessen that. So the way I look at it is, understanding kids are going to do dumb things. You educate them, and then you say, here's the consequences for that, right? But what we have to do is say, what's not being done? Where's the hole in that? Is administration, has it done enough in the past to protect the kids who have been bullied? I'm not sure, right? And let's be clear, I'm not taking that off of the kids who bullied the kids. I'm not. What I'm saying is, we have to do what we can to ensure those kids aren't allowed to continue to perpetuate that behavior, and certainly protect the kids who are the subject of the bullying. To me, if that's done, we're not in this position, right? My old house school counselor used to, every year he would say, if you prevent something, you don't have to find a cure. We're not a community that's being called racist if certain people in certain positions inside a very specific organization had done what they were supposed to do. And it's impossible for anyone to prove that to me. I just don't believe it. I just fail to believe that if these issues have been effectively dealt with, that we'd be in this position. And people are going to make the SORT kids or the NBC or whoever's going to make as much noise as they can because it fits the narrative. We're a largely white, affluent community in North Texas. That's ground zero for people to be called racist. Certainly when you're a majority conservative community. But South Lake's also the most cohesive community, one of the most together communities. Where if you look at the South Lake Families Pack, for example, that's not just white people, right? There's Asian, there's Black, right? There's all types of ethnicities and certainly representative of cross sections of religions. That's people who are fed up. That's people who say that this organization, which gets the majority of our tax dollars, is not being a good steward, is not, handling their responsibilities in a way that is reflective of an apex community. And I just think people are not going to take it anymore. And I'll be honest. I mean, I'm speaking not as a city councilman now, but this is a good thing for South Lake. The South Lake Families Pack, the groups that have come out in opposition to CCAP, people standing up and saying, listen, I'm all for diversity and inclusion, but you're not going to do it this way. I think that's a good thing for this community.
So what would be the good way? I mean, I know a little bit about what CCAP is putting in place and suggesting. What would be, most of what we've seen has been reactive. What would be a proactive or a preventative way of approaching it?
Is to go back and say, and this is what I hope Dr. Ledbetter does, is to say, what was that plan? Let's not go back to why it was created, right? Like, to me, if you go back to 2018, that was a great time for the community to reflect on what really is racism. Is it kids at a lake house chanting the N-word? Is that really racism? I think, but we're beyond that. Let's just say what it is we're trying to address. By and large, we want to make kids more culturally aware. For example, the kid who makes that accent as a Asian or whatever kid walks by, he's being culturally insensitive, right? That's not racism. That's not even reaching the level of bullying automatically anyway. So let's make sure they're educated. But then let's just be very explicit in saying, what is it we want to address? So instead of saying racist behavior, most of these issues come back to the mistreatment of another person. Whether it's taunting, whether it's saying somebody is fat or this, that, and the other, it's changing that. It's modifying that. So what I hope Ledbetter does is say, what is the DDC Was that what was their intended goal? To address what key behaviors, right? Behaviors. And then let's say, what are the things that this community would find palatable? And I mean community holistically, not just 63 people and not just, any one group. What can we agree on as being effective in modifying those behaviors, right? In changing that. That's the simplest fix. And it's not particle physics. Identify the behaviors that need to be changed, right? And come up with, there's experts out there. I'm certainly not one of them. There's experts out there on effective ways of managing bullying or curtailing certain behaviors. Because the key is, what I tell people, listen, you can do whatever you want to do, just not in school. It's the same way people don't stand up in the halls of Congress and yell, derogatory words towards a fellow senator or a Congress member. I think it's simpler than we've made it out to be, and this plan was not the solution. If it was ever going to be the solution, it couldn't have been written out as it was written. It couldn't have been delivered as it was delivered, and the community would have had to have been involved. And I say that as somebody who was involved in the creation of parts of the plan.
All right. Man, that's not where we, I think, planned on the conversation going. But that's some wonderful insight. I like the idea of just how do we address the behavior itself at the origin. It's such a complicated issue.
Yeah, because think about it.
Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. I mean, but just one quick note. I mean, think about it. There's so much dissatisfaction, and so much of it is directed at, and you can look back at this, is directed at what wasn't done. Like, for example, many of the SOAR kids, I'm not seeing them call out kids or teachers who did something. What they're really angry at was there was no redress, right?
Yeah.
And that's the issue. So why was there no redress, right? Did they not report it? Was it reported and nothing been done? Those are the types of things that hang over this community like a dark cloud. And it's just become emblematic of what happens when you have a poorly managed, poorly led institution. And I think this upcoming election is going to fix that. I think we're going to have more accountability, more leadership, more transparency.
So when is your term as councilman over?
May 2019, May 2022. Okay. So 1 year.
So are you going to run again?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Very good.
People keep asking me that. So it's great to put that out in the universe. Yes, I've never thought. I don't take it for granted that I'm going to get reelected, but I've never thought I wouldn't want to run 2 terms.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, man. Thank you for giving me an hour of your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Look forward to this one hitting the air.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, it would help us reach more people if you could rate and review the show wherever you listen and share it on social media. If you have ideas for future episodes, please email me at shane@biblecollegeprep.com. Thanks for listening.